Hi there, Mel here from Synthesis Health Lab, and in this video we are going to be going over step 3 of the cell danger response, or otherwise known as the cell healing cycle. So in previous videos we went over what happens when a cell is stressed or injured, and the stages of healing that cells go through. So we're going to go now into stage 3. Before we get into that, if you have a complex chronic health issue that you're just trying to tease out, you're doing research, you've tried all sorts of things and you just can't figure out what to do, then you might want to consider joining our free group, and you can apply for it. And it's a really cozy group, really helpful, full of really kind people who are going through a similar process to you. You can ask me any questions that you have, and the link to the application will be in the description below. So now let's dive into it. So just as a little bit of a review, when a cell is stressed or injured or infected, it goes through 3 distinct steps to heal that are coordinated by our mitochondria. This 3-step process and the integration of signals and healing phases across different scales of life between local mitochondria, organs, tissues, the nervous system, and the organism, which is you, this is called the cell danger response. And then chronic inflammation, which we've all heard so much about and is the cause of all chronic disease, this is a 3-step process that got stuck at one of these steps. So depending on which step it gets stuck at, we'll really end up with different diseases and different symptoms. We can see that the trigger of the cell danger response is really not very specific. This is a very ancient, very primitive mechanism, so it can be triggered by trauma, infection, stress, pesticides, medication, temperature, EMFs, and so on. And so when a cell is healthy, when tissue is healthy, it's dynamically adapting throughout daily cycles and seasonal cycles. And so the metabolism is shifting according to the environment. And so it's going into daytime metabolism during the day and a nighttime metabolism during the night. In the summer, our cells and our tissues, our organs in our body are going into a summer metabolism. And in the winter, we shut down more. We're more like in a hibernation mode. And we go into winter metabolism. When there is a stressor or an infection or a toxin exposure, then the cell will enter the cell danger response. And so we first go into CDR1, and then CDR2, and then CDR3, and then we can enter the health cycle again. The purpose of CDR1 is really like immediate defense, damage containment, innate immunity, and repair. And this is at the expense of normal tissue function. So if you've ever twisted an ankle, you know that your foot doesn't work so well. And if you've ever had an infection, you know that you don't work so well. Once the initial damage from the injury or infection or toxin has been cleared or contained, cells shift into CDR2 and enter the cell cycle. And this is all about replacing the damaged tissue. So here we're growing tissue, and then we're also producing adaptive immune cells, right? So the part of our immune system that takes a little bit longer to come online requires us to make lots of new cells. And this is also part of CDR2. Once the damaged tissue has been replaced in CDR2 and the infection is cleared, the new cells start integrating into the network of healthy cells. So this is what CDR3 is all about. So we can see that each stage of the cell danger response has different metabolism and has a different relationship going on in terms of the overall human network. So over here, this is where we're healthy, and then we have this trigger. And then in CDR1, there's this inflammation. In CDR2, we've got these naive stem cells that are now creating new tissue. And then CDR3 is really about a shift back to health. So we get back to the metabolism of what's considered like a healthy or an anti-inflammatory mitochondrial metabolism. Our microbiome starts being happier and healthier. Our oxygen consumption in the cells gradually increase. The vagal tone increases, and this is really about top-down integration between the brain and the brainstem with the cells and organs of the body. And very importantly, the ATP that's outside of the cells goes down to nothing. So ATP is the energy currency of the body, and when it's inside the mitochondria, this is us feeling energetic and having energy to do stuff. When it's outside of the cells, this is an alarm signal. So this is very pro-inflammatory, and this is a really core way that cells communicate that there's damage or infection or some other alarm bell to the neighboring tissues and to the brain. So in order for us to shift out of CDR3 and into the health cycle, the extracellular ATP has to go down to zero-ish. So features of cell danger response 3 is that now the mitochondria are producing energy more efficiently with oxygen. This is known as oxidative phosphorylation, which is what people learn about in high school about how ATP is made, but only healthy mitochondria do this, right? So the mitochondria now are shifting into a healthier mode. We have tissue remodeling. So we've got these naive cells that now need to be the right size and the right function for the body. And so things are changing. Detoxification resumes because it stopped. So when cells are under threat and they're trying to do damage containment, they're not taking out the garbage, right? So in states of emergency, often the rubbish collection will be suspended, and that happens in our cells. So in CDR3, we can now start using energy and oxygen, and detoxification resumes. Sensory and pain modulation are now improving, and sleep architecture tuning is another function of this. So in earlier stages, we might have more slow wave sleep or even less slow wave sleep, but now in CDR3, we can really fine tune the sleep that's more in touch with our natural daily fluctuations. So new cells that are born in stage 2 undergo cellular education from older neighboring cells to fine-tune genetic expression by giving metabolic instructions based on memory and programming from before the tissue injury. So all that to say is that the cells that have been around for a while know the deal, and they know what proteins to produce, and they know about the body they're in, and they know about the environment that they've been in, and so they have this memory. And so now they are teaching the new cells how to behave and how to be a part of this tissue based on what they know. Synchrony with neighboring tissue is achieved through entrainment, through the propagation of calcium waves. This is how new cells in tissue get into sync with existing tissue. So we have this resonance effect. It's very beautiful, where the new cells now know how to move and oscillate with the same cycles with the surrounding tissue. Cells also reestablish connections with the autonomic nervous system and lymphatic system. So we go from this focus on the local environment to try to contain damage, now reconnecting with the nervous system and more of that top-down control. A key regulator for entering the health cycle is eATP. So as I explained earlier, that this is really the core signal that is letting the area know whether or not there's injury or we can now go back into being healthy and thriving. And so we can see that here at the bottom that we have this spike in eATP, which is really this core primitive signal of some sort of attack, and that as the healing cycle is progressing over time, this is coming down, right? And so in order for us to go into health, this really needs to go down to the bottom. And so then what can happen is this idea of hormesis. So hormesis is a bit like the saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, which is not always true. It's also summed up in the saying, the dose makes the poison, right? So that's something which is maybe a little bit more accurate for what hormesis is. So something that at a large amount might kill a cell or kill you, in a small amount that can provide a healthy stimulus, a healthy stress can make us stronger in the end. So we can see that here is the stress or the initiation of the cell danger response, and then we go to CDR1, then CDR2, then CDR3, and then recovery. But sometimes, let's say we've exercised and then we become stronger, we have this hormetic effect. And if cells or tissues get stuck in any of these stages, then we develop these illnesses. So one thing that can happen when cells and tissues get stuck in CDR3 is that part of the problem is that the threat is over, but they don't realize it. So maybe there was an infection and now the infection's gone, but the cells are still behaving like there's an infection. Or maybe there was an injury, but the injury's healed, but the cells are still behaving like there's an injury. And so this really reminds me of the story of a Japanese Army soldier named Teruo Nakamura, and he was deployed to the Dutch East Indies in 1943, but he ended up losing contact with his unit and retreated to the jungle to engage in guerrilla warfare. And he continued to do that for 30 years because he didn't realize World War II was over. And so it's really, this is what happens with perpetual CDR3, that the cells don't realize that the war is over, and so they're not reconnected with their unit. They don't go home to their families and that sort of thing. So conditions that are associated with CDR3 include chronic pain disorders, autonomic, affective, psychiatric, and neurologic issues. Many immune and autoimmune disorders fall into this category, microbiome dysfunction, and other target organ dysfunction, which is fairly general, but a lot of things can fit into this category. So specific conditions that are characterized by too much CDR3 activity are autism spectrum disorder, PTSD, POTS and PANS, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, many autoimmune syndromes, and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. The actual list is very long, but this just gives you an idea of some of the conditions that are associated with persistent CDR3 activity. So looking at some of the problems with common approaches, in general, industrial medicine has a very poor understanding of CDR3 illnesses and what causes them and how to treat them. And this is partly because industrial medicine views humans as simple systems where we can isolate a variable and then do one thing and then hope that we can predict something else. But humans are complex systems. I mean, that's not in dispute. And CDR3 illnesses are especially characterized by failure to increase levels of complexity, because we're talking about human development, and then which is increasing complexity, right? And then if we have an illness, we have a reduction in complexity. For example, it doesn't matter how intelligent someone is. When they have the flu, they're not very articulate, right? They're not very dynamic. They become less complex. And then when they're healthy again, they become more complex again. And so all of these illnesses are really characterized by this failure to increase complexity. But because industrial medicine doesn't understand human systems as complex systems, it just fails to see what it's looking at. So a simple system like a radio, if you understand how all the parts work, you understand how the radio works. But for complex systems, we're talking about a lot of qualities of emergence, right? So emergent properties are ones that are categorized by the saying that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and that understanding each of the simpler units does not give you an understanding of the overall system. So with things like memory or speech or mental health or affect, these are all emergent properties of complex systems, and the approach of looking at humans as simple systems is just a terrible match. And this is true for all stages of CDR, but I think particularly for CDR3 illnesses, there's the largest mismatch. Now, functional medicine struggles with order of operation and how to approach these complex illnesses. So it tends to jump around between different systems that are often involved, like, okay, everyone needs to start with the gut, and you need some antioxidants and meditate and use this device, but there isn't really an understanding of an order of operations in terms of the order of healing to help support the system move in the direction it wants to go. Many integrative approaches recognize the central importance of the mitochondria in these illnesses, but they do not understand that there's a healing cycle with distinct modes and how to support progression to healing. So there's this idea of, we need to support the mitochondria, but not an understanding of these different modes. These approaches may try to focus on integration too soon. So if there's an active infection, then the body does not want integration because it wants to be able to have inflammation in order to deal with the threat. So integrative approaches may accurately recognize that there is a lack of integration, but not know when to try to support it. And there are a lot of approaches out there that are focusing on, boosting energy, boosting mitochondria, and trying to stimulate hormesis, but again, not understanding that there's an appropriate time to do that and a time when that might backfire. Also, remember that hormesis, that dose makes the poison idea, it's one thing if you exercise when you're healthy, you might get stronger, but then in the cases of a lot of these CDR3 illnesses like chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, they are characterized by exercise intolerance. So the exercise actually makes people worse because the cells are not in a situation to take that stimulus and turn it into hormesis. They're not able to do that yet. Sometimes these approaches focus on strategies that are more appropriate to earlier stages of the healing cycle. So, reducing inflammation or reducing oxidative stress. But people stuck in CDR3 often don't have enough inflammation. These folks are often stuck in a perpetual winter. We talked a little bit about summer metabolism. And so a lot of these approaches are either ineffective or make people worse, and people don't understand why. And so at the Synthesis Health Lab, we focus on a strategy that's based on physiology. So it's based on accurate principles of the order that the body wants to heal in. So we start with the immune system and helping it become more specific and more effective. Then we move on to digestion, then neuroadrenal, which is that reintegration stage. And then where there's tissue damage, only then trying to increase circulation. By removing blockages in the healing cycle and supporting the body to resolve its healing response, we can systematically heal from complex chronic illness. So that is the purpose of Cell Danger Response 3 and how and why it works, and also what happens when it goes wrong. So I hope that is helpful, and I'll look forward to seeing you at the lab. Take care.